Hi, it's Doug DeVitri. Welcome back to the CoTrackPro podcast. I have a very special guest. This is a topic that isn't really talked about. In many cases, not until it's too late, right? So I want to welcome you, my new friend, Dr. Christine. Say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me, Doug.
So it's a really interesting topic on coercive control, right? And as far as language goes, many people don't know what that is. They've never heard those two terms put together, and also how it relates to families and children. You have a rich history of not just helping people, but you've kind of gone through some of this yourself. Take us back to kind of your journey from how you started this, I think when you were like 19, right?
That's right. When I was 19 years old, I became a sexual assault, domestic violence crisis counselor. And someone I love had been abused as a child. And I remember thinking, how in the world does this even happen? Like, in what world do children get abused, right? And adults get away with it. And so I had this passion right from the get-go. I always wanted to be a teacher. So I went into teaching, but then realized, oh my God, I want to go home with these kids. Like, I worked in an inner city. A lot of these kids were coming to school hungry. They weren't doing any schoolwork at home. You could tell their homes were impoverished, right? And then I became a child welfare social worker. I worked for CASA, which is an agency that really monitors what's happening in court systems, and worked alongside attorneys in trying to support children and families, and took children on visits to see their perpetrators. And that was mandated. I had to actually get children in a car to go see their father in jail when to create supervised visitation. It's kind of a crazy world that we live in, that we even would insist that a child does that. From there, I became a school social worker, got my MSW, became a therapist and a college professor teaching social work now for over 20, I think 2 years. Had no idea I was living with an abuser. Had,
Oh,
like, did not make the connect because I never suffered physical violence. I suffered everything else. And all of a sudden, one day in my classroom, teaching my students, I had a moment where, wait a minute, I think I've experienced all of that except for the physical violence. And so coercive control still was not in our vernacular then. It really became propelled, I'd say, in the last 5 years for sure. Dr. Evan Stark propelled the term. I decided that when I finally escaped my abuser after multiple attempts, and what we know about coercive control, this term that I'm going to define for you, is that it intensifies post separation. Abusers have certain character traits where when someone decides to actually try to leave them, they get worse because they can't handle it, and they weaponize anything and everything they can in their place. Like literally it becomes a tornado filled with venom. And so when I did finally escape, I decided to go on for my doctorate. And I am so fortunate that I was able to work under Dr. Evan Stark, who is the propeller of the term. And he, critiqued me and gave me some guidance. And I've worked with other really wonderful people in the field. But I always want to remind people, I didn't just come to this. I've been doing it my whole life and didn't know I was experiencing it. So that's a little bit about my story, and didn't know, by the way. So, as I said, I started off because I couldn't believe children could be abused in this way. And the whole time I was married to an abusive person who was abusing my children. Again, not overtly,
mhm.
but the covert psychological manipulation that was occurring is all abuse. And we don't have systems that acknowledge that.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Thanks for sharing that. They definitely don't teach you this in school. What are some examples of coercive control that you've either personally witnessed or in working with some of your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say coercive control is the underpinning of all abuse. Think about it for a second. When you think about racism, sexism, when you think about child abuse, when you think about child sexual abuse, trafficking, domestic abuse, when you think about an employer who is harming his employees, who takes advantage of his employees, it's about power and control. Anytime there is a person who has a pattern of behavior where they're exerting power and control over another person, the intent, if it's a pattern, is to diminish that person, is to get that person to fall in line. It's like it's like you almost become a prisoner of war. And frankly, what we know, what they said in the 1970s, is that living in a home with a perpetrator, first of all, women are safer in an alley than they are in their own home. And second of all, living in a home with a perpetrator is intimate terrorism, even if you don't know it is, because you just are trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And it's psychological warfare. I actually talk about that in my TEDx. It's called psychological warfare. So, what I want your listeners to know, because there's some people out there are calling it hidden abuse, it's not hidden abuse. It can be psychological in nature. It's gaslighting, manipulation, intimidation, isolation. It's stalking. It's legal abuse, financial abuse, and certainly the weaponization of children. But if I can't, think about it, if I can't control you by gaslighting you, what's my next step going to be? It's
Mm.
going to become physical. It's going to become, there's going to be other ways to abuse you that are more overt because my covert standard isn't working anymore. And so I say to people, again, coercive control is the underpinning of it all, whether it's physical or non-physical. And what we know is that when it becomes physical, as with any abuse, this is the underpinning of it all. It's violent. It's extremely violent. And so
Wow.
when I think of examples, I mean, I can certainly, use my own. My children were 9 and 10 when I caught my ex having an affair. I left with them to go to my parents' house for the weekend. I was getting text at the time. It actually wasn't real. It was more emails. There wasn't even really text going on. But my parents were getting calls. She's kidnapping the children. I'm going to call the police. Now he knew where I was, and he loved my parents. He also was imploring me to come back. You're my soulmate. We'll go to therapy. So see, there's this intermittent reinforcement, we call it. There's good and bad. And of course, all we want to do is have our family back together again. So I went back. And 8 years later, I found out that day when I went back and went to teach my night courses at the college where I teach, my children were told that I had cheated, that I was off of all of my medication, that I could not be trusted, and they should be very careful around me. And that
Mm.
really is when he began to work actively. I believe he was working. I always say they start day one. They know what matters to you. But he began to actively diminish me as a mother and as a partner in that family system. I became the scapegoat, but I had no clue. I had
Mm.
no clue. I thought he loved me most of the time, even though it really felt dysregulated in the family system. But he was loved by everyone. He would cook for everyone. He was the good guy. So when I found out from my children that this was going on, I was floored. I was blindsided. And so my life's work is helping protective parents see this coming, know it's coming, and then fortify attachments as much as possible, because an abuser's goal is to literally eradicate you from your child's life. That's their
Wow.
overall goal.
It gives me chills,
Mm.
right? Just thinking about it. What are some of the scars you would say that happen to, let's say, yourself or your clients, or even the kids that are involved? Because there's a lot of pain, right? There's no broken bones or bruises, but there's a lot of pain that's deeper down into the things that you're experiencing.
Well, and I have many clients who have children who are being physically abused. But sadly, the court system thinks that two parents is always better than one, even if one parent is an abuser. So when you ask me, like, what's the pain point of all of this, it's betrayal. When you think about it, the victim, the adult victim, is living in a circumstance where they can't imagine that person is actually betraying them in some way, wants them to think they're this big instead of who they really are, tries to, again, the definition of coercive control is a systematic, a
Mm.
multifaceted approach to diminish a person's agency and autonomy. So if I take that away from someone, now an adult victim doesn't have a voice, and they feel they betray themselves to some degree. Now you do that to a child. And so they are being betrayed by the abuser because they know that abuser's love is not unconditional. They know that if they don't do what that abuser wants, there's going to be ramifications, physical violence or other things. And oftentimes it's the other things. It's like not very often the physical violence. But also that child's being told that that protective, safe parent probably is a betrayer too. And that was my children's narrative, right? Their whole life they thought I had cheated multiple times, that I was
Yeah.
stealing money, that I need, and this is when I say it's my story, I could literally give you thousands that are identical to this. The abusers have the same playbook. They all use the
Same
same.
pattern.
Yeah, and that's why we call it actually in our book, Framed Woman in the Family Court Underworld, Know the Abuser's Playbook.
Oh my
Because
gosh. Oh, sure. Now you know the playbook. Now you can definitely see it coming. And I would imagine the kids have a hard time and they're confused. And I know in the system they have an attorney who's called a guardian ad litem, right? Who's supposed to represent the best interest of children. Tell me kind of what your experience is in working with those individuals.
yeah, so I took the GAL training here in the state of Connecticut just for intel, because the reality is that if I'm known as someone who has a bias to protect children, I will never be hired. I'm going to say that again. If my bias is to protect children, and I'm known in social media world, in my website, whatever, as
Yeah.
someone who wants to protect children, I will not be hired as a GAL.
Why is that?
GALs get hired because they have no bias, supposedly. And so part of the problem that we're seeing in the family court system, and there's lots of, thankfully, some groundswell occurring right now. Part of the problem is that we have GALs who are paid off, by the moneyed parent to give a conclusion, or we have judges who believe 50-50 no matter what. 50-50 shared parenting no matter what. We have legislation now, and I think 13 states have approved immediate 50-50. So there's no more quote unquote conflict about it. But what if one person's an abuser? So the reality is that and here's the problem, is that if you go to get a divorce, I don't care where you live, Kalamazoo, it doesn't matter. No, then there is going to be a set of steps that most attorneys take, most. And the set of steps is, okay, you need a guardian ad litem, you need a custody evaluator, unless you've resolved it. You need a guardian ad litem, you need a custody evaluator. And guess what happens? Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars to just end up with 50-50 if you're lucky.
If
If
you're
you're lucky.
lucky.
Yeah. And so if you are perceived as someone who's trying to protect your children because there's a history, a documented history of domestic violence, or I have a mom right now, her child went to the pediatrician, disclosed sexual abuse. The mother lost custody because the mother was
Wow.
called an alienator.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have a system that does not either care or they're colluding. It's one or the other. Yeah.
Sure. And I was the other day we were speaking with a gentleman named Al Huntoon, who's written a great book on bridging communication using AI, which is kind of interesting. Some of the things that he talked about, and some of the things that he saw was really like it comes from a place where you have to have respect for yourself and respect for the kids, right? And communicating. And if you don't do that, then you're going to kind of be taken off of some sort of course. So I'm wondering how difficult it is based upon what you've seen and what you've heard to kind of get back on track so where there is this mutual respect and mutual understanding to work. Because if you love your kids, right, you should be working together.
But you can't work with somebody who has disordered character traits. You can't. And what we know about most of these abusers, if not all of them, is that if someone consistently has a pattern of behavior to coerce and control another person, they don't have the ability to be self-reflective. To better intervention programs are bullshit, sorry, for these particular perpetrators. It's not going to work. So it's like trying to reason with a rock. It's not going to happen. So what we have to do is protect victims, and we need systems And therapists, that's why I train therapists. I have a coercive
Mhm.
control professionals training for therapists, attorneys, advocates, and coaches, because if you assume that everybody coming into your office does not possess a personality disorder, then you're wrongly assuming. Anytime something's high conflict, as soon as we say, oh, that's a high conflict situation, we have to immediately be going to, wait a minute, what's going on really here? Is there one person who maybe is dysregulated as a result of being a victim for a long time? And is there another person who's been coercing and controlling this person long term and now is using, weaponizing the legal system and wants custody only, by the way, only to hurt another person? We have research out now that talks about the dark tetrad. These people are sadistic. And anybody who thinks like I'm like, she's being dramatic, I'm telling you, I see it every day, all day long. So, yeah.
Well, how do you protect yourself, right? Because you have, I would imagine that if you're going through this process, right, and let's say you're the person who's being controlled, what can you do to either set boundaries, right, or protect your mental health in a way that, there's a lot of healing, or maybe you're in a cycle of healing because this continues, year after year.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really challenging because abusers' intent is to isolate us. They want us to have a smaller world so that we don't have support, right? And so it's really important. And that's, that is one of the gifts of social media, is that there's now online support, right? There's ability to create connections with people in a way that feels safe, because I have to say virtually every single one of my clients are being tracked in some way. So be careful in understanding that, but finding community, because I think the biggest thing is that we victims and survivors historically have been silenced. And what we have to have people understand is that you are so not alone. You have no idea how not alone you are. It's like
Yeah.
such a prevalent problem that a lot of people like to look through rose-colored glasses, but the reality is this is a really prevalent problem. And so if you're listening and you feel alone, know that you're not. Find people in the social media world to even connect with. Hear your story through someone else's story, because your story is going to be pretty damn similar.
Yeah, and I can imagine there's a lot of fear too, even sharing your story, right? Because if you share that story, then it might be used against you.
Absolutely, which is why I constantly share mine, because I don't care. But I don't, my children are adults. They see clearly what happened. It took them a long time. As you could imagine, they were indoctrinated for years, a program. It's like a cult. But they, thankfully, and I always say this to protective parents, is that that attachment that we create with our children when they're very little
Mm.
can never be entirely broken. And so it's about parenting these kiddos differently. They need a different kind of parenting. And I figured that out once I realized what was going on. But I think it's really important for people to recognize that it's not hopeless, right? That there is space for things to come together, and that you can share your story with your safe people.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I love that you're doing is that you're training others to be able to recognize these patterns. So are they mostly therapists? Are they attorneys? Are they judges who are going through this? And then also, what are some of the, I know you laugh, but what are some of the processes, right, that you can walk them through to not just bring more awareness to this issue, but also give them the tools to disrupt it?
Yeah, I always say there's two main things. Like a lot of people talk about, oh, judges get domestic violence training. Well, first of all, they're getting domestic violence training, which means that if there's a violent incident, that's how they're determining abuse. That's wrong, right? We know abuse, the underpinning of it all is coercion and control, and that if it's gotten physically violent, that means he couldn't abuse those other tactics that he's been doing for a long time, or she's been doing for a long time, are not working. So that's number one. I would say the two things that are missing from all of these trainings, besides the fact they got to get out of the violence world, because that's an archaic world, what they have to do is understand pathology of abusers, how abusers work. I mean, they show up in their beautiful outfits to court, totally calm, regulated, they're business people, successful, they got all this stuff going on, they have great friends and family, quote unquote. None of that is true. It's all performative. So they have to understand what that can look like in their room and what trauma looks like in a courtroom. What does trauma really look like? And so that, and then the second piece to this is anybody who's doing this work, who is a parent, who loves their children, how could you not be understanding the impact this has on the developing brain? So for me, those are the two very important, vital things that need to happen. In my particular training, I offer it self-study. It's like 7 hours, but it's also offered to attorneys. Judges, they wouldn't sign up for my training anyway, I don't think, but attorneys and clinicians, therapists, coaches, and advocates, the live 2-day training is 14 hours long. And I cover everything, including what happens in family court, how to help the children, what's the pathology of the abuser. Because again, I don't think enough people recognize that this is an unacknowledged child abuse. When children are forced into care with someone who has abused one of their parents. Wait a minute. We tell victims all the time to leave, don't we? And I call it escape. We tell them all the time to leave, yet we make children live with that person. Make that make sense to me.
Well, I know you've been doing this for over 20 years now. What are some of the success stories that you've seen either for the parents themselves or for the kids who received the right support, you know, and not everything's not 100% right, but I imagine there's some really great success stories that you've had and work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that you said 20 years because it's been 37. So you've really
Oh,
kept me
sorry.
young.
Sorry.
You've kept me really young. I like that. So maybe 38 now anyway. What I would say is that protective parents have so much influence. And what happens when we're a trauma victim is that sometimes when our children are dysregulated or they're, maybe, swearing, not getting off their technology, they're behaving in ways that are really like some of it's typical, but also some of it is being emboldened by the abuser, right? Our first reaction, especially as trauma victims, is to be reactive, is to be like, how dare you, or how could you, and all of these things. And all I can say, the most important thing that these children need more than anything is connection, because connection fires attachment. And so if we are constantly correcting or calling out the bad behaviors, we are actually, unfortunately, not helping that attachment. We are not helping that flame burn the way that it needs to burn. The abuser, when children go off to an abuser's house, we just have to assume the entire time, intermittently, that abuser is doing whatever they can to diminish that protective, safe parent, to diminish that relationship. And the way to do that, by the way, is to diminish the child covertly. It doesn't have to be overtly. It could be something as simple as, you don't really want to play soccer anymore, do you? Why would you want to play soccer? Right? It doesn't have to be, or your mom, I know she's tired all the time. She works so much. It's too bad she didn't have time to go to your game last week. Like, you see, it doesn't have to be blatant. And then the children are living with that. And then they come home and we need to be like, you know what, sweetheart, I'm sorry you heard that. Mom will definitely be at your next game. Connection. And so I think protective parents don't realize that what was created from the moment they held that baby in their arms can never be erased, ever. And so this is a clinical, like I come with a clinical hat. You probably are aware. I mean, I've been an advocate, I'm a researcher, I'm a therapist, I'm actually a survivor and a protective parent. People don't recognize how important attachment is. And so I say to anybody listening, work on fortifying that attachment as much as possible. My signature program is a protective parenting program where I teach protective parents how to do this, because it's challenging when you've suffered so much. It's really challenging, but it's doable 100%. I have
Well, I
good
appreciate
stories. Moms who tell me, they will say to me, "Oh my God, I did X, Y, and Z like you told me to." And by the way, I have tons of free content online and on YouTube. I mean, it's not like I want people to have this information. And they'll say to me, "Game changer. Everything shifted in my family. Oh my gosh, it's working. It's working." Those are the comments I get all the time because it's little tiny shifts and moving towards connection.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I was going to ask you, what are some of the tools that you offer? You've got the one book called Framed, right? You've got you were a TEDx speaker, right? And I
Yes.
watched that video. That was really good.
Yes, over 500K. I'm so
Yeah, there you
excited.
go. And so some of the other tools? You've got the Institute.
Yeah. So that is, I'm hoping to train, I always call it a sea of allies. We need people working. I don't think we're going to change the system, right? I mean, your title right there, Tools for Families Navigating Conflict, Custody, and Court. I don't think we're going to change the system. I do think we can infiltrate it with really good people who understand it. And I always tell the people who take my training, you might get in there and help 10 people, and then the court's going to be on to you. They're going to say, "Wait a minute, she's got a bias to protect children. Wait a minute, she's a victim's advocate." And then you won't get hired again, but you would have helped 10 people. 10 people. So it's literally 10 by 10. It really is. And I think I think infiltrating the system is very important. And I think really supporting protective parents, because when you just, I don't want to get so, I know we're almost out of time, but I wanted to just like, when you take a child who grows up in a home with an abuser and then this protective safe parent, but the protective safe parent is broken down, like traumatized, right? And the abuser wants the child to not have an attachment to that one safe parent. Well, that's what supported the abuser becoming who he became, was not having a strong, secure attachment. So you
Wow.
see, if we could intervene, I mean, there's biological traits, there's other factors, but one
Sure.
thing we know is secure attachment prevents someone from being harmful, prevents it. I mean, what? I mean, we're spending billions of dollars on domestic violence, and nobody's talking about how we keep putting children in homes with abusers, and that abuser's goal is to create. They don't know this. They're not clinically like, "Oh, I'm trying to fracture attachment," but that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying
Yeah.
hard to take away the most secure, important thing a child needs: the ability to be loved unconditionally, the ability to authentically be myself. No, I have to perform all the time. Well, what we know happens with abusers, they become the best performers. It's all about shame. So it's so preventable. It drives me nuts, as you can tell. I'll stop there.
Well, I appreciate you because I think what you're talking about is getting to the root of the problem. And I guess there's a way to can maybe orchestrate all these other little things that are going on. But when you get to the root of it, then all these other things start to kind of fall in place.
Absolutely. Abusers have disorganized attachment. That is what they have as a result of how they were born, as a result of their family system, as a result of their own trauma.
Mm.
Lots of people grow up with those types of circumstances and don't become abusers. But abusers have what we know is they're more compromised, they're more vulnerable to these traits. So
Yeah.
then they end up with those traits. Well, if we don't want our children to end up with those traits, then we need to make them safe. It's simple.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experience, your wisdom, your tips, and your tools. I'll make sure that I put the links to your website and the TED Talk and kind of the notes so people can kind of check out a little bit more work. Dr. Christine, I really appreciate you being a part of this. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.